This is the Making Waves podcast. My name is Dave Roteman. We're here with Brock Greenfield, who is the Commissioner of School and Public Lands. Brock, welcome.
Dave, it's a pleasure. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to visit with you and the folks listening in.
Oh, thank you so much for being on. Let's dive right in. The Commissioner of School and Public Lands is, of course, a statewide political office. You're elected. And what exactly does the Commissioner of School and Public Lands do?
The office's central responsibility is the land management of all of our trust lands across the state and the public lands. There's a little bit of a differentiation, and I won't get too into the weeds on that, but for the most part, we go out in the spring of the year. In fact, we're a week and a half away from beginning our lease auction season. We have a number of tracts of land whose leases have expired, and it's our responsibility to go out and offer them for new leases. And we will be going to, I think it's 29, somewhere about there, different counties this year, and offering those tracts of land for lease. And ultimately, the lease revenues go back to largely to the K-12 system. We have a number of land classes under our purview, but the K-12 or common school category is the largest group that we serve. And Dave, I was mentioning, I like to mention it to people when I'm asked about the office, because I have a lot of people that start talking with me about education policy and their assessments and so on and so forth. And I just want to be clear. Think of this office as the Office of School Lands and Public Lands. We don't have anything to do with education policy. That's the Department of Education. I got a call from a reporter just in the days leading up to session, and he wanted to talk about the voucher bills that were going to be introduced this year. And as a former legislator, I gave him a little insight as to the legislative process, but I said, that's not my lane. And I said, I'm going to kick you over to the Secretary of the Department of Education. And then I gave him a couple other contacts of some of the legislators who would be, working on those bills. But we are a land management office with the charged with, a fiduciary responsibility to those we serve, largely the K-12 system, to provide as many dollars in return through the apportionment process as what we can. So, and I'm proud to say that through our lease program and our permanent fund that's invested by the South Dakota Investment Council, this year we set a record in terms of the apportionments back to those that we serve. And I'd like to say it's because of my genius, but I think it's because we have a pretty good foundation as set by the people who've come before me. We have our South Dakota Investment Council working very hard on our behalf, and we have lessees who are they recognize the role that they play. I mean, obviously it's about their operations, but they also take pride in the fact that they're helping to support the common school system, the public school system across the state of South Dakota. One of the other things that we do, we have 97 state-owned dams under our charge and purview. We're responsible for the maintenance of those. And I would like to get into, one of the bills that we talked about this year is the Richmond Dam project down the road here. But the Office of School and Public Lands oversees 97 dams. Game Fish and Parks has about 80 under their stead. Game Fish and Parks kind of has some of the premier ones, or the higher profile dams and lake interests across the state, but we have some that are pretty high profile, and then we have some. And when we're talking dams, some are small earthen dams, low hazard. Some are medium hazard. Some are high hazard dams. And when I talk about the different classifications there, a high hazard dam represents potential if we have a breach of loss of life, loss of land, loss of livestock, and And if we get into the discussion about Richmond Dam, I'll kind of highlight some of the considerations that we looked at when it came to getting that legislation across the finish line this year. As the Commissioner of School and Public Lands, I'm also on the Investment Council, and that's because we have a large permanent trust fund. Let me say this: at the time that we became a state, we were entitled through a federal law that had been passed years prior, championed by General Beadle, who was the South Dakotan. We were given 3.5 million acres of surface interests across the state. And I know it's a little boring perhaps to talk about, but the ideal situation was that we would get Section 16 and 36 in every township. Well, in some cases, those were already settled, so we went out and looked for indemnity land or replacement land in areas that were not settled, and we got the thumbs up from the federal government to consider those part of our allocation. Those lands have worked for the students of South Dakota, K-12 system, higher education, for the School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, for the South Dakota Developmental Center, just to name some of the interests that we serve. And they've worked for us since 1889 when we became a state. Whenever land has been sold, that land or those proceeds have gone into the permanent trust fund. And so we're down to 760,000 acres of surface land that's available for lease, either haying and grazing leases or agricultural leases, mostly haying and grazing. But the land that has been sold remains a key element of what we provide in terms of apportionment. It was the year 2000 when the South Dakota voters said that they were going to allow for the School and Public Lands Permanent Trust Fund to be invested by the Investment Council in a fashion that's similar to the retirement funds and what have you that they oversee. Prior to that, we were confined to some very, what I would say, conservative instruments, and so it was really our permanent fund wasn't growing the way that it has in the past 25 years. Up until 2001, the permanent fund was sitting at $130 million. Since then, it's ballooned. Last June 30th, our trust fund stood at $416 million. And more recently, I noticed that in a report I got, we had exceeded $430 million. So we're fast approaching the $500 million mark, and those dollars are working for us. And because we have such a vested interest in the goings-on of the Investment Council, I have a seat at the table, as does our state treasurer, as does our executive director of the retirement laws office, and then we have the 5 that are hired or appointed by the E-Board as well, the executive board of the legislature. So I have one of the 8 seats at the table in oversight of the Investment Council. But I want to give them the credit. It's the Investment Council that makes things go. It's their philosophy that has led to the success that we have experienced as a state, and I'm just a small cog in that gear, and frankly, on a temporary basis, I just really take my hat off to the people who have established a really firm foundation at the Investment Council. And so our schools benefited to the tune of $15.6 million from our operation this year. And then the higher education institutions, the Ag Experiment Station, some of the others that I mentioned, the Human Services Center, et cetera, they received an additional well, in excess of $3 million from our investment activities. So the Office of School and Public Lands, I'm thankful that it's been on good footing because of good management in the past by my predecessors, and I hope that I'm going to be able to continue to generate even more revenues going forward. I remember when Ryan Bruner came before the Appropriations Committee in his last presentation, he talked about the unprecedented times and the returns that they'd been experiencing, and he said, this isn't going to happen forever. He said, and I don't want to have any, I don't want people to be overly optimistic. He said, we've had good lease auctions, and we've had good returns from the Investment Council. There's going to come a time when that doesn't hold true. I mean, there are going to be downturns and what have you. Well, last year we set a record, and this year we set another record. So I'm riding the wave. Again, I'd like to say that I'm solely responsible for that, but I couldn't say that honestly. It's just because of really good management in the past, and kudos to those who helped to contribute to that success.
Well, everyone appreciates good management, especially from our elected officials. And just as kind of a side note, too, correct me if I'm wrong, back in the late 19th, early 20th century, the land commissioner was considered the second most important elected office in the entire state of South Dakota.
And that's right. And I was in Huron for an event 3 years ago as I was running for office, and I kind of gave the highlights of what the office does, and what I was asking them to place their trust in me to do on their behalf if they would see fit to hire me for this job, so to speak. And afterwards, a former legislator came up to me and says, I consider the Commissioner of School and Public Lands to be the most important elected position other than governor. So even he, 120, 130 years after the office was founded, still maintained that perspective. And I do appreciate that. It's an office that is so below radar. A lot of people don't know what we do. But it's so important. And I would say, I quipped a couple years ago, I knew a lot about what I was getting into when I was running. When I said I had learned like 10,832 things since I took office, things just keep coming at us. And there are certainly curveballs. I've mentioned to a lot of people, no 2 days are the same. You never know. Just when you think you've seen it all, you get a knotty situation, and it gets you twisted in knots, and you got to try to work through that. And just some of the different inquiries that come our way are really unique. But I'm blessed. I'm blessed by the trust that's been placed in me by the people of South Dakota, and I'm trying to do my best, and I've got a really good team around me who really helps me. I told them I don't want you guys to be yes men. I want you to challenge me when we're talking about decisions that have to be made. I want you to provide the counterpoints so that we don't miss anything, so that we're considering everything with our eyes as wide open as possible. Ultimately, I'm the decision maker. The buck stops with me, but it's my team that really helps me to get to a point where I think I can make a good and well-informed decision. But yes, the simple answer is, I don't know. I would say the Attorney General would lay claim to the notion that he's got the most important constitutional office, and the Secretary of State and the Auditor and Treasurer. We all play an important role. But the Office of School and Public Lands is probably the least understood office, and arguably remains one of those, top level operations in the state. And I don't want to take anything away from anybody, but this is a hugely important office. And Dave, I'm not going to kid you. When I was in the legislature, I heard it. Even since I've been elected to this office, I've heard it. People talk about, trying to consolidate offices, and they'll say maybe the office of the auditor and the treasurer should be combined, or the office of the treasurer and the commissioner of school and public lands should be combined. Well, I can tell you, my eyes are absolutely wide open. We have a small operation here. I've only got 6 people on my staff, but we do some very important work. And I mentioned the 760,000 surface acres, but we've got 5.5 million acres of subsurface interests as well. And the story there simply goes to the fact that anytime since 1919, anytime the state has owned land and it's sold, we maintain or we retain the mineral rights, the subsurface mineral rights. And so we have that 5.5 million acres, and a lot of them are out west, and a lot of them have natural gas interests out there, or gold or lithium or what have you. So there's an awful lot that our small staff works on and deals with. And I would argue that this is a hugely important office, and may even be able to lay claim to the idea that we are number 2 behind the governor, if you will.
So if I can follow up on that a little bit. A couple of things. What's like a typical day in the office for you? And you mentioned mineral rights and gas rights. So you would be the office that, for example, gas companies would go to for permission to drill or explore for gas or uranium or whatever?
Yes. To answer that specific question, we get contacted by people who want to place into nomination some of our mineral acres, and we go through a process in determining whether or not we're going to forge ahead with that. One, we make sure that the acres that they're targeting or contemplating, that they are in fact our mineral acres. And then we decide, okay, well, is there a surface lessee, and what will be the the conflict, if you will, is if they go out there and put up an oil rig or a gas well or something like that. But the law provides for that mechanism. And then if we proceed to auction, then we run our auctions through EnergyNet, and we're trying to actually we've talked with them about ways to enhance that, whether it should be an open bid process or sealed bid process or what have you. Because ultimately we want to return as many dollars as possible. But they go through that nomination process and procure the lease, and then they have a period, call it a development period, if you will, of where they do their exploration, and maybe they determine at the end of the 5-year period, or maybe even 3 years, that no, this just isn't viable. Well, we say thank you very much. We appreciate the relationship we've had, and we appreciate the dollars that you've provided to our operation, and ultimately to the children of the state of South Dakota and the other interests. But in a lot of cases, they proceed to production. And at such time as they do, those leases are held by production until they no longer are productive. And so we've got some that have been ongoing for decades. And they provide money to our permanent fund, and they provide money through the apportionment process to the schools. And it's a very important element of what we do, and we certainly would like to think that there are more opportunities. One of the really big elements of what we're working on right now is I hired Caleb Fink just over a year ago, and then I hired Josh Klum more recently, and Caleb has begun the mapping program for all of our mineral acres, and we would like to really showcase where our mineral rights are. And there are I think we have untapped resources. There's a pocket. There's basically a hot spot in south central South Dakota where there might be some geothermal opportunities. We've got again, I talked about the oil and gas out west, and some of the other minerals that are out there, are present, that are being explored right now. In some cases, production has been going on for a while. But Caleb is going to try to work in tandem now with Josh. In fact, he just told me 2 days ago that he's gotten Josh access to the program, and they've been working this week even. And Caleb's been working for a longer time than that, but they got going in tandem. Excuse me, sorry about that. In tandem on some of the mapping. And when you're talking 5.5 million acres, it's a big undertaking. And you can about imagine that there are subsurface interests in pockets all across the state. I mean, anywhere where we've had ownership of state land in the past. Now, some of those, I'm not about to imply that all 5.5 million acres are viable for mineral exploration. Some of them are completely isolated. Some of them are in Sioux Falls, for example. Well, you're not going to start trying to explore for oil and gas in downtown Sioux Falls. I don't know if we have anything in downtown Sioux Falls, but we would have some mineral rights there in Sioux Falls, and that's just not viable. Nobody's going to look at that, but we just want to shine a light on some of the areas where we have state mineral interests, and as some of these other entities look and they overlay their map with ours, they might say, jeepers, as I said, there's a hot spot. I was at a conference last August where a gentleman presented on geothermal, and when Caleb and I started talking with him, he said, "Oh wow, yeah, there's a spot in south central South Dakota that we'd be really interested in trying to take a look at." So that might open new doors to new revenues for the state of South Dakota, and an enhanced distribution to those that we serve. But yeah, back to what you started, the first part of the question. We have requests for easements. We have people that are trying to deal with quiet title actions and so on and so forth. I've been named as a defendant a number of times since, and the first time I got noticed that I was a defendant in something, I'm like, what did I do? And then I learned that, well, there was it was down in the southeastern corner of the state at McCook Lake, and one landowner was trying to proceed with quiet title action and just wanted to notice us that if we had an interest in the land that he was talking about, that we had to be cognizant of that. And we stipulated that we did not have an interest. It was beyond the high water mark, and therefore we basically said, we're out. We don't have any interest in anything that you're talking about. So that one went away nicely. But as I said, a guy gets curveballs all the time. I'm thrilled to say that Mike Corneliuson, who's been our land agent for just about 46 years, he's 2 months and a week away from his 46th anniversary as the land agent here. And boy, he has a wealth of knowledge. And then I've mentioned 3 of my people. Renee Knapp's been our finance officer for 18 years. She's a steady hand. And Justin Nagel is my deputy. He's been in the office for just shy of 3 years. And boy, he's been a quick study on all things school and public lands. Even when I was running for office and I'd get some tough questions out on the campaign trail, I'd call him and I'd say, look, I've got a question. If you can answer this, in the next couple of weeks, I'd sure appreciate it. I'd pose the question to him and he'd say, oh, I was just looking at that yesterday. Here's the answer. And, I'm just, I mentioned it before, I'm blessed. The team around me is awesome, and I'm so thankful for the expertise that they provide. The new guys they were legislators, and so they're very good policy advisors to me, help me deal with things on the legislative level, but the other folks are just invaluable to me and to our state. So I would go back to my comment before, Dave. No 2 days are the same. You never know what's going to be coming your way. I've had a couple of contacts already this morning about some really dicey and unique situations relative to our leases and some assignments that might be taking place and stuff. And we have to work through these things. Some of those processes are just very normal, just mundane, if you will. And other ones, boy, they get involved. And we've got to make sure that counties are getting the taxes that are due them, because people who get a lease on school and public lands, trust land, are responsible to the county for paying the taxes on what they're leasing. And that's something that not a lot of people understand, but when it comes down to it and helping the county governments, the local units of government pay their bills, that's an important element. And when you're looking out at the northwest corner of South Dakota, Harding County has 252,000 surface acres of our 760,000 acre portfolio. And Perkins County and Butte County both have in excess of 72,000 acres. If those leaseholders didn't pay taxes on the state land, there would be an astronomical shift to the others who have agricultural land out there, and it would put a real burden on them. So, it's just the way that it's been for a number of years, and it all helps to make everything mesh nicely. But when it comes down to it, as you can imagine, sometimes people don't pay their property taxes in a timely fashion, and then we have to put the squeeze on them and say, get those property taxes paid or we're going to cancel your lease. Or different unique situations arise, and we try to make sure that everybody is made whole and everybody can meet their budgets. So we find ourselves dealing with things that are a little peripheral to our operation, but it's important. As a legislator, and I know that I'm getting long-winded here, but as a legislator, there was one year when Ryan Maher came with a bill asking the state and the Office of School and Public Lands specifically to pay the taxes that were due in Perkins County. Well, through Ryan Bruner's efforts, and he was in touch with the state's attorney up there, and they did get the taxes settled. But when you're a small county, a small rural county in that case, and you're looking at a tax bill that hasn't been satisfied in the four or five digits, five digits, that's a bite. And that puts a real burden and stress on those folks. So they want to make sure that they're getting their money, and we've got to make sure that our lessees are making sure that happens. So we have a lot of responsibilities to a lot of people.
You mentioned legislation, so let's move on to that, because a lot of our listeners are very involved with legislation, what's going on in here. So there's a couple of pieces of legislation relevant to your office. One is, you mentioned this before, the Richmond Lake Dam bill. Could you tell us what that is and how it's relevant and what's going on?
You bet. So Richmond Lake Dam, in 2022, before I was the commissioner, we heard the first bill. So I was on appropriations at that time. It just so happened that Ryan Bruner and Mike Corneliuson went out there in December of 2021, and they invited me to go up there, one as an appropriator and two as the guy who was looking at running for this office. And, I was one of the announced candidates, and they wanted me to be plugged into what was, what the situation was. So at that time, we stood on the spillway with some members of the Homeowners Association, and we talked about the spillway replacement project that was imminent, that had to happen. And Ryan brought a bill then in 2022 seeking $6.5 million for the spillway replacement project. Well, that bill was passed. And by the way, Richmond Dam is situated about 5 miles northwest of Aberdeen as the crow flies. So it's very close in proximity to our third largest community in the state. And I'll get into the high hazard element just in a second, but when our engineers went out and started doing some testing out there, they discovered that this thing is going to be much broader in scope than had originally been anticipated. They started doing some borehole testing, some drilling out there, and they nearly breached the cutoff wall or the dam, if you will. And for 2 days, they worked around the clock to mitigate the threat that was really a tenuous situation. In fact, the one guy had spoken for a room for a couple days and never checked into his motel room because he was out there around the clock trying to make sure that we didn't have a disaster. So it transitioned to a cutoff wall or embankment wall or dam, if you will, plus the spillway project. And the last 2 years, we've been trying to drill down on what the costs will be associated with the replacement of both elements, plus the bridge that spans the spillway and the length of the cutoff wall. And the ultimate, well, the bridge spans the spillway, but it's part of the broader structure. The ultimate price tag is in the mid $20 million range. So the 6.5 was just one small element. Last year we got some additional dollars from the state, and then they passed some federal funds authority for that as well. The federal funds didn't come in as we had hoped. We got an award notice of about $2.9 million from the feds, but we were hoping we might be able to get as much as $15 million. Just so happens that with the FEMA High Hazard Potential Dam Grant, there was a lot of interest in that across the country, and so we had to take what we could get, and that just turned into 2.9 as opposed to maybe 7.5. And the other thing, we know that the feds are fickle. The feds had told us originally that we would be able to apply for 2 phases, that the spillway project would be considered one phase and the dam or cutoff wall project would be considered another phase. And then they told us in a subsequent communication that, no, you're only eligible for one award, and by the way, it's $2.9 million. So a little disappointing, but we're pleased with any help that comes from outside our state's borders. But the ultimate issue there, when it comes down to it, if that dam breaches, if we don't get that dam taken care of, and by the way, it was a WPA dam, a WPA project from the 1930s. It's exceeded its life expectancy, and it is in bad condition. If that dam would breach, the studies show that 1,790 lives would be in imminent danger. It includes 2 elementary schools in Aberdeen. And then it would have a downstream effect as the floodwaters got into the James River. It would wash all the way downstream and flood hundreds of acres downstream all the way to the Yankton area, to the southeast corner of the state. So this thing has it's at its core. I mean, when people talk about Richmond Dam and Richmond Lake, there are a lot of people that recreate out there. There are some nice houses out there, etc. But when it comes down to it, if that thing breaches, it's going to represent mass chaos and devastation. And so we have to make sure that as stewards of that we're taking care to maintain it or replace it. In this case, we're talking about a full-scale replacement. So, but it's very important, not just to that area, but also to the broader swath of land downstream. And I would also note a few years ago, I think it was 2021 when the legislature appropriated money for the Elm Lake Dam, which was north and west of Aberdeen, call it 35 miles. But Elm Lake is responsible for about a third of the water supply to Aberdeen. And so both the city and the county had skin in that game. They both stepped up and said, look, we realize how vital that structure is to us, and therefore they had some financial interest in that as well. With respect to the discussion so far, we know that the state is on the hook for, as I mentioned, in the mid $20 million range. And then there would be the possibility that we would have to go back to some of the locals and ask them for some supplemental finances. But these are state responsibilities at their core. And therefore, we know that it's incumbent upon us to make it work one way or the other. So I'm very thankful the legislature passed that bill last year. They passed another bill this year for the remaining roughly $13 million to get that across the finish line. We did have a meeting yesterday. I wasn't thrilled when I found out that, after they had the 30% design presentation 5 months ago or so, but now yesterday was a 60% design presentation, and they're looking at maybe elevated costs in certain areas, but they've already stipulated that it's their intention to try to find ways to address some of those and seek some cost savings. Because I said, look, the legislature's been very clear. They want this to get done. They want it to get done right, but they want it to get done within budget. And if I have to go back with my hat in hand next year and say, yeah, we fell a little short, we need a couple million more, that isn't going to go over well. So we've given them their marching orders to continue to look at making a structurally sound, turning loose a structurally sound product, but to do it within budget. And they understood our message loud and clear. But yeah, it's a vitally important project to so many, not just in Brown County and Aberdeen, but all the way, call it the east central part of the state.
Well, as an engineer will tell you, dams are temporary. All dams are temporary, and they eventually will have to be replaced. So that's an important project. Moving on.
Yeah.
There's other legislation, the brand board legislation. Now, I know what the brand board is, but could you explain what the brand board is to people and why it's relevant to your office?
Well, it didn't get rolled into our office in any way, but there was a bill, and just let me go back. The brand board has existed in South Dakota for nearly a century, somewhere thereabouts, and it was operated by the stock. Yeah, operated by the stock growers for up until 2008, and as Dave, I didn't mention, but I was a legislator for 22 years, and so I've fought a lot of fights and heard a lot of fights, and there were a lot of times issues that arose relative to the brand board, and so I know that this issue has persisted for a long time. So this year there was a bill brought. In 2008. The responsibility was taken away from the stock growers, if you will, and it was transferred over to the Attorney General's office in DCI, and more recently it was put under the Department of Agriculture, which has now become the Department of Ag and Natural Resources with the merger of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and the Department of Ag. So it's just been a hot button issue for a long time, and some of the brand board or some of the brand owners across the state have been really seeking answers to a lot of questions they've had, and they don't feel satisfied. And I don't want to besmirch. I don't want to besmirch anybody. I'm just trying to lay it out there as what as to what I heard in testimony. They just feel unsatisfied that they're getting the answers that they've sought, and they wanted to place the brand board under the Office of School and Public Lands only as it related to the reporting for reporting purposes. They felt that this office is an elected office and would be, responsive to the people, and they didn't feel that maybe in its current structure that's happening, and so they wanted to take it out of the realm of the bureaucracy, if you will, and place it under an elected office. And I talked with my team, and I said, we I think can manage this if the legislature sees fit to put it under us, to attach it to us for that purpose. The brand board is still autonomous insofar as it's an informational budget. They are able to do their day-to-day operations without the heavy hand of government, I guess, if you will. Whether it's under the Department of the Attorney General's office or the Department of Ag and Natural Resources, or whether it was in some way transferred over to this office, they would still be autonomous, but they would have to report to us, and we would have to make sure that checks are getting cashed in a timely fashion, that there are no audit findings, and so on and so forth. I said if this happens, one of the things that I'll do immediately is I'll call for a special audit, basically a broad sweeping audit to hit reset. I don't want to, take on responsibility for something that hasn't been given an all clear. And I'm not alleging anything. I'm just saying I think it would be a good management practice for this office to make sure that we are starting from, with a clean slate. And maybe that audit gives them the all clear and move forward, go ahead, everything's hunky-dory. Or maybe they would come up with some audit findings that need to be addressed. So in the end, it passed the House overwhelmingly. It came out of House committee with a strong vote, and it passed the House floor with a very strong vote. Yesterday, it hit a snag. It was killed in the Senate committee. I appeared only as a neutral party. I was asked a question or a couple questions, and but I was neutral. I didn't testify as a proponent. I didn't testify as an opponent. I assured them that I trust the legislature's judgment, and if the legislature sees fit to place this under our office, I will accommodate. I recognize that. I said I know the history. I know that this has often been a hot-button issue, and if the legislature would choose to place this under my office and the office of future commissioners going forward, I believe that we would have the human resources to make the accommodations to comply with all the reporting requirements and to make sure that the reports are being filed in a timely fashion. And as I said, that checks are being cashed by those folks when they come in. That's been one of the issues. And I don't want to get too into the weeds, and I don't want to speak ill of anybody, but I know that was one of the audit findings just a couple of years ago. And I've heard more recently that people have been sending their checks in for renewal, and that those checks haven't been cashed, and they've been in their office since October, November, and December. And that's one of the things that I've learned in this office. When we get a check, it has to be processed within the next day. So we get it up to the treasurer's office. We don't sit on it. That's a big deal to people. And I think that's one of the reasons that there remains some questions. But the Senate Ag Committee killed that bill. But it was one that we were watching. It was one that we certainly had a keen interest in and wanted to know if our day-to-day operations were going to be changed because of the passage of a bill. We also recognized that, it still had a couple obstacles to go through in the legislative process, and then then the governor, if the bill would have passed, or if it gets resurrected and does get passed, that doesn't mean that it's a law yet. The governor still has the opportunity to weigh in on that, and I'm certainly respectful of the governor, and I'm certainly respectful of the Department of Ag and the tough situation that they have. I should say Ag and Natural Resources. It's been a very tough issue, no matter who's been in charge of it for a lot of years. And and probably will continue to be a hot button issue. Now, I will say I want to make note that they're reconstituting their board. Yesterday there were three confirmation hearings in committee. One of those people is the former commissioner of the Office of School and Public Lands. Jared Johnson received a unanimous vote in committee. He'll go to the floor next Monday. A couple others will go to the floor, one with an advise and consent recommendation, one with a do not advise and consent, but they can all, the Senate will decide whether or not to confirm them. But the brand board then will presumably they'll have 4 or 5 members after next Monday, and they'll be in a much better situation going forward because they've had 2 people confirmed earlier this year, but they were kind of in a weird state where some appointments hadn't been made. There were people that remained on there without being reappointed to conduct their ongoing business, but they hadn't been confirmed or even reappointed. So anyway, that's a long answer to a question that we were neutral on the bill, but we would have been happy to try to help remedy any situations that have been outstanding for a number of years. And I don't envy anybody who has to work in that realm. I feel for the many interested parties who came forward and testified either as proponents or opponents. There were ag producers on both sides of the issue. There were different groups, associations that testified on either side. And so I just really, what I want to see is for the folks who are at the helm to help to get this thing fixed. And I do think that with Jared Johnson, presumably will be a new member, I think he's got a breadth of knowledge. He's a brand owner. In fact, he says he owns 2 brands in South Dakota, one in Oklahoma, and I think he said one of the A's, Arkansas or Alabama or somewhere. Certainly has a keen interest. He's a farmer and rancher. He's from the eastern side of the state, but also has a ranch operation in Meade County. So he knows the issues well, and so do the rest of those folks who are on there. So I do trust them, and I just want to see, from my perspective, by the way, again, I didn't have a vested interest in this. I would have done what the legislature told me to do, but I said if the bill dies, life on our end doesn't change. And if it does pass and get signed into law, we just have a little bit more responsibility, but we will make sure that it works. Our days in the office aren't confined to 8 to 5. We do the job we've got to do to get the job done. And there are a lot of nights when I leave here after 7 o'clock, and some of those nights other people are still in the office. So we've got a very dedicated staff, and we just want to see that whatever it is that we're charged with is running as smoothly as possible here for the people of South Dakota.
Wow, I think you've established that the Office of School and Public Lands is kind of a big deal. And you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, we are a big deal, and again, that isn't a reflection on me. I'm a large person, but I don't consider myself to be a big deal. But I stand on the shoulders of giants. There have been a lot of amazing people who've come before me, and that's true of other constitutional offices and other legislators as well. Dave, I do want to say, the Lord is why I'm here. When I went to college, I was a business major. I wanted to get out in the business world. I wanted to own my own business. By the time I was 30, the Lord just had a different plan for me. And when I gave my life to Christ, I was in college, and He started shining a light for me. And He said, take this step and take this step and be obedient to where I'm leading you, and don't get so caught up in what your own plans and desires are. And I will say with absolute certainty, my life isn't what I thought it would be, but it's better. And as I look back and see the things that the Lord led me to that prepared me for where I am right now, I just count myself as a tremendously blessed person. And if there's anybody out there listening, I just want to tell you, the Lord has a plan for you. And if you're not a believer, I would encourage you to make that decision to follow the Lord and to just be obedient to where he wants to lead you. He's got a perfect plan for your life, and your life you might think it's pretty good, but if you're not in step with where the Lord is leading you, he may have an even more perfect path forward for you. So I am I consider myself as blessed as I can possibly be, and I want everybody to experience that joy, the joy of knowing that you're being obedient to the Lord here on this earth, and two, that you have a promise of eternal life in heaven with him. So those are my parting thoughts. I love the Lord, and I want people to know that, and I want people to know that he wants what's best for them in their lives as well. So that would be my parting comments, Dave.
Those are wonderful parting comments. Thank you so much for being with us. This has been Making Waves Podcast. My name is Dave Ropeman, and we've been here with Brock Greenfield, who is the Commissioner of School and Public Lands. Thanks, Brock.
Thank you, Dave. You take care, and all of you be blessed.